So this video is about how I broke up from my abusive relationship, how I was able to get out of it. Often it's well known that in abusive relationships, it's very, very easy to get into them. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how strong you are, what background you come from. The abuser is very good at disguising themselves, and and they only reveal themselves really, or start to, after the first 3-6 months, maybe even longer. And then when it starts to, the symptoms starts to show, that abuse starts to happen. So it's very easy to fall into that relationship, but it's also almost impossible to get out of it, because for many reasons, and I'll go through those in this video of what those reasons were for me. A lot to do with fear, a lot to do with guilt, a lot to do with shame, a lot to do with her playing the victim. It kept me trapped in that relationship, put me in a tailspin, made me not be myself, and the manipulation, the emotional and psychological abuse really made it almost impossible for me to leave that relationship. And actually for me, fundamentally, I could only leave if she broke up with me. And I'll go into reasons why I felt that in my relationship. So I'm going to do this video in 2 parts. The first part is about sort of what led me to the point where I needed to break up with her. And the second part is exactly how we did break up. So let me begin. I would say that the starting point of me wanting to leave the relationship was I would say it really was there throughout the relationship as a starting point. I remember having conversations with my family every few months saying, I'll give this till September, I'll give this another 3 months, and then when we got there, I would say I'll give it another 3 months. And whenever I set those timelines of, if things don't improve and if these issues are still there in 3 months' time, I will have to end it. But then always the good times came back, and something changed, or she worked on something, but some other issue came up afterwards, and it just basically, I always knew deep down that I could never be with this person while they had these issues, and I think that's probably one of the most important things to come out of all of this, is really that, and it doesn't matter what relationship you're in, whether it's an unhealthy one, a healthy one, or an abusive one. If you've been with someone for a year or a substantial amount of time, and there are things about that relationship you don't like, and you don't know whether to move forward or not, there's just one question that you need to ask yourself, and that is, if everything stayed the same at this point in time and nothing changed, their personality, how they were, what annoyed you, what upsets you, everything stays exactly the same, from exactly how it is now for the rest of your relationship, the rest of your life, is that okay for you? And if the answer is no, then you should end it and move on. Don't think that you can change that person. Don't think that they can change themselves. Don't think things will change, because first of all, you can't control the other person. Secondly, you can't. There's no guarantee that anything will ever happen or anything will ever change, or if it does, how long it will take. Your happiness is most important. Don't think about what you've put into that relationship until that point. Don't think about, well, I just need to change this and that with them or with the relationship. After a year, if at that point you if everything was to stay the same, could you be with that for the rest of your life? And if that answer is no, then that's as simple as it gets. So for me, I always felt that in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time, but when we kept getting there, I didn't know this advice I just gave, but I just kept trying to make it work, and I kept seeing the progress and improvement, and I think that really kept me stuck in it. The work that she did with her therapist. Okay, so let me begin. So in the first part of it was the acceleration of abuse in the last 3 months. This was one of the first factors which really made me think, I can't be in this and I need to leave it now. So it's basically started with her packing her bags and threatening to leave on a weekly basis. She was so upset with me, so angry with me, so disgusted with what I did, that she would pack her bags, say, I'm leaving, I'm going, and basically wait around long enough for me to feel the guilt, feel the shame, and basically, try and change her mind to get her to come back, to the point where I was actually unpacking her bags. Or rather, once I convinced her, she told me I needed to unpack her bags. So the shame, so apart from packing her bags, I felt a lot of shame, felt a lot of guilt in the last 3 months. She was always telling me what a bad person I was, how I was a liar, how I was disgusting, how I did so many bad things to her and to hurt her, and to that she'd never been treated like this by anyone before. She felt so embarrassed by what I did, what I said, that I didn't know how to be in a relationship. I didn't have experience of that, but I really felt so much shame and guilt that I was a bad person. I did something wrong more than any other time, and that's when I thought, well, I can't live a life like this. The other thing that happened in the last 3 months was what I called, she became a hyper victim. She was always playing the victim throughout the relationship, about people mistreating her, about bad things happening to her. It was full of a story of how she suffered so much in her life. But in the last 3 months, it really went to a hyper level. So that consisted of every day she had some illness that stopped her doing anything, going anywhere, seeing anyone. It was her ears, it was her teeth, it was her stomach, it was her ankle. The list just went on and on. Every single day there was some really big health issue that basically disabled her, essentially, from doing anything. The other thing that she did as a hyper victim was she fell out with all of her friends, all of the friends that she had left. She fell out with all of them. They mistreated her, they did this to her, they did that to her. They're bad people. She is the poor victim in this. The third thing as the hyper victim was that she fell out with all of her employers at her job, to which point she basically resigned. She fell out with her managers. She moved teams, switched teams because she didn't get on with them, and no matter where she went or who she was dealing with, they were always mistreating her and being bad to her, and eventually she had no other option but to leave. The other thing that happened in the last 3 months was me and her were living alone. Before that we had flatmates that we were living with. Now we were living just the two of us, which basically meant all the arguments we had, which were always behind closed doors, or not. we had to do it in the park, we had to do it in the car when no one was around. Now it was open playing field. It could be anywhere, and it could easily be at home, and that was the it was easier for her to have arguments with me, to be angry with me, to isolate from me, to go into a room, to curl up in a ball, to cry, and basically say that I'd almost been abusing her in a way, that I was so bad and so cruel and so nasty to her, and she would, not let me near her, etc. And it was so easy for her to do that at home in those last 3 months. So that's the first part of when I started thinking, well, this is not for me. I can't do this. This is not how I want to live my life. So that's the first part. The second part was talking about the future more. So we started talking a lot about the future. We were going away on a holiday, a big holiday for a month, and she kept, I think, bringing it up about what we're planning to do in the future. She started, I think, talking about weddings, and that she wanted to have her wedding abroad so that none of her family would come, or her friends would come, and only her immediate family would come. She didn't want any of them there. So she wanted it abroad, and we started talking about other things to do with the future, and I realised that in order to keep her happy, I needed to take part in that conversation. I needed to instigate that conversation. I also wanted to know that, how would our future may look. So I was happy to take part in those conversations. And as we did that, I remember, saying that we should borrow her mum's car and drive around the area and see where we might live, and basically, by putting myself in that situation, or really putting myself in that future, I could subconsciously see how my life was going to be, and really put into the foreground, this is happening. This is really going to happen. I'm really going to be with this person. And then subconsciously the question always was, is this what I want? And then her cousins had twins, and I remember thinking how difficult it would be for me to have children with her. She was always the self-proclaimed expert in childcare, and even telling me some story about how she almost adopted children when she was like 19 or 18 years old, and that she knew exactly everything to do with childcare, so willing to give advice to everyone and anyone about how to take care of children. And actually, when my cousin came to Israel, she basically took over that whole situation and made it really uncomfortable for me. And I just thought, well, she knows absolutely everything. I know absolutely nothing. And it's going to be very difficult. She'll be very controlling. And even with her cousin, who already had a child, she was telling her cousin all the things that she was doing wrong in setting up for the new twins that were coming along, and how that they had an argument about it, because she was basically saying, you're doing this wrong, and you're not thinking of this, and etc. etc. So the talking about the future really put it into my mind of, is this really what I want? Is this the future I want? And the third thing is basically motivations and feeling stuck. So I was not motivated to do any exercise. I was not motivated to see friends. I didn't have any dinners with friends or friends over for dinners for about 8 months, the last 8 months. My entire focus was around her issues, keeping her happy, her life, her family, helping her deal with all of her problems, her illnesses, etc. It was literally a full-time job helping her and with her. So that was the motivation side. I also remember feeling stuck because I couldn't break up with her. because in my head it was like, how could I deal with life without her? Will I ever find anyone again that is loving or caring or good to me, or that I like as well? And there were things around the house that needed to be done or fixed or whatever, and I was being told throughout the relationship of, how did you cope without me, and how did you do this without me? And while I sort of joked it off because it was completely ridiculous at the start, that repetitive nature actually went into my head subconsciously, and it basically became a barrier for me breaking up with her, because I just thought, how on earth will I deal with my life without her? How there are things that I would need help with, and how will I find someone? The other part of it was, I just didn't know how we could ever break up. It was, even when I thought I want to break up, I just thought, I just didn't know how to do it. It was easier to fix the situation, however impossible it was, than to break up with her. I just was so fearful of her getting mad, being upset, feeling the shame and the guilt, that it was easier for me to try and fix the situation than to go down that route. I was basically tied up in this story of love, that how could I do this to someone that cares about me and I care about them? How could I break up with them? She also used a lot of manipulation that was towards the end of the relationship, which was, if we break up, you're going to realize that you made a huge mistake, a huge error, and you're going to beg to come back. I won't let you back. That I would be happy or I would be able to move on, but she would be in the depths of depression, and she would struggle, and how could I do this to someone that I love? And I needed to promise to her that we wouldn't break up, and that I would keep us together. I was the stronger one. There's a lot of manipulation there, and so I just felt all that guilt and shame and responsibility, and her being mad and her being upset. I couldn't do it. And then deep down I had this feeling that I knew she couldn't help it. I knew all of this abuse that was coming to me, even though I didn't know it was abuse at the time. I knew that she couldn't help it, and that she was an amazing person, and when she was loving and caring and happy, she was fantastic. And I just needed to help her, and it wasn't her fault, and she was working on those issues, and those issues were being solved bit by bit, and if I could just stay around long enough, we could fix those issues and be in the clear and have a happy life. And so I just needed to stick around and be patient and accept that she didn't mean it, and it wasn't, and she couldn't help it to treat me like this. And so that's basically what I told myself. And then I think ultimately I just didn't know how she would leave peacefully, and how it would ever end peacefully in a calm way. I just was so scared of the situation, of her, of the life I might have after. I just didn't. I knew I wanted to break up. I knew all of this wasn't good. And then when I got to that point, I just didn't know how to do it, and I couldn't do it. I was trapped in it, and so basically that was where I was. So you can see how impossible it was to break up, even though I wanted to, even though I knew. And the key things that were tying me to that relationship was shame, that I was a bad person, guilt that I did something wrong, fear of her, trying to keep her happy all the time and comfortable, and then her playing the victim. These were all the things that were tying me in that relationship and stopping me from leaving. So, as you can imagine, it was an impossible situation, and I was well and truly stuck. So watch the next video, and you can find out how it actually did end. And if you relate to any of this, I really hope that you don't feel alone. Me sharing my story will help you to understand what's going on, to understand that it's an abusive relationship, to understand that these things are not unique to you. These are very common factors in an abusive relationship, and that it is possible to get out. And I will tell you my experience in the next video of how I did it.